Yes, I will be defending the Chainsaw Man ending. So the manga just ended about 2 months ago and the reactions are mixed to say the least. Actually, it's not mixed, it's pretty negative. Unresolved plot threads, unfinished character arcs, world building gaps, and a bizarre message that feels thrown together at the last second. People hate this ending, and honestly, I get it. Spending years waiting for these ideas and plot threads to matter, only for them to be essentially thrown away. But here's my question. Could this really have ended any better? I genuinely think this ending was the best case scenario for Chainsaw Man. I know that sounds insane, and I'm not here to say that you just didn't understand the genius of Fujimoto. No, please, we are done with that. My defense of the Chainsaw Man ending is instead comprised of 2 parts. Firstly, this ending is the best we could have hoped for given the circumstances. And secondly, that we the fanbase helped create these circumstances. Maybe it's not just Fujimoto who is to blame, but our lack of feedback. Maybe we failed him as much as he failed us. My name is Lucky7 and I invite you to join me in some self-reflection. You know what's sad? Chainsaw Man Part 2 was actually off to a strong start, with many fans, myself included, considering these first few arcs to be the peak of the series. Denji goes to school for the first time, he makes friends, he goes to class, he enjoys the little luxuries that most boys his age take for granted. Moreover, there was this double life aspect to it, where he was a superhero that people loved, but also this young boy that didn't fit in. Very Spider-Man-esque. Nayuta brought this new dimension to his character, showing a side of him that was more responsible, more charitable, and Asa had amazing chemistry with him as well. And they made a great pair. She's morally rigid, he doesn't care, she overthinks, he barely thinks, she's diligent, he's sloppy. But they're both outsiders for different reasons. And they develop this mutual respect because they see the goodness in each other's hearts. It's quite beautiful and it goes absolutely nowhere. In fact, most of the plot threads don't go anywhere meaningful. Nayuta dies and then Denji has his 47th mental breakdown. Asa goes AFK for huge chunks of the story, even though she started out as the main character. While Yoru literally molests Denji, Denji doesn't hold it against her because he forgot the self-respect he developed at the end of part 1. And then she offers to have sex, then the world ends. What? We get all these side characters like Fumiko, Yoshida, Fami, and they're underexplored. World War III happens. There's a Church of Chainsaw Man. Oh my god, I can't say this seriously. Quan Chi shows up, kicks some ass. It's just a mess. It kept going until there was no way to reasonably satisfy all these plot threads. Because seriously, what relevance does the Statue of Liberty coming alive have to Denji's quest for meaning? Maybe you could stretch it and say it's like a symbol of his inner turmoil or whatever, but it's forced. How do you conclude Denji and Asa's relationship in a healthy way after Yoru molests him in Asa's body, then they agree to have sex, and Asa is somehow on board? Are we just moving past the fact that this is Asa's body? There's no way to conclude this. The damage is done. Fujimoto crossed way too many lines for the sake of shock value and hurt the characters in the process. Honestly, a world reset is kind of the only reasonable way to conclude the series in a way that feels somewhat meaningful. And I have to ask, what did fans expect? Did they expect Fujimoto to pull a rabbit out of a hat and somehow make this into a masterpiece? For years, the response was basically let him cook, or this will all pay off, or you just don't understand Fujimoto. But what if it was never cooking? What if the kitchen was on fire and we kept calling it genius because we trusted the chef? I think that these days people are more honest and accepting of Part 2's strengths and weaknesses. They argue that there's a night and day difference in quality between Parts 1 and 2 of Chainsaw Man. This is where it gets controversial, but please hear me out. I get why people feel that way. I like Part 1 more too. It has a better villain, stronger momentum, and a more memorable sidecast, and a clearer sense of direction too. But what if I told you that Part 1 had a lot of the same problems? So in Part 2, we see Denji get assaulted by Fumiko. This is quite bizarre considering he learned to resist Makima, who he was madly in love with. Yet he can't control himself around Fumiko? Who the hell is Fumiko? It's like his character development was undone for shock value. Fujimoto is brilliant at creating striking moments. He can make you laugh, cringe, feel empty, feel devastated, sometimes all in the same chapter. But long-term storytelling, long-term character progression, that's where things get shaky. And I don't think it started in Part 2, it was already there in Part 1. Anyone remember the Reize arc? I already made a video about this, but I was more focused on Reize and how I felt her character could have been expanded. But let me ask you something. At the end of part 1, during the final battle against Makima, Reize is there. She is physically present. Yeah, she's unconscious, but she's alive. So why does Denji have no reaction? I get that it was actually Pochita fighting Reize, but after the battle, Denji was the one standing there. This is the girl Denji cared about so much that when he thought she abandoned him, he said he would never feel happiness or sadness ever again. This is one of the most emotionally important people he has met up to this point. So why does Denji have no reaction to her presence? You can call it subtle storytelling, but I would disagree. Subtle storytelling would be Denji seeing her and choosing not to speak. Subtle storytelling would be like a glance with a hesitation and like a few panels of Denji's face looking at her that shows there's something unresolved there. But we don't even get that. The story just kind of moves on without showing anything. And that's not a small thing. This is supposedly one of Denji's most important romantic experiences and it gets no conclusion whatsoever. This lack of a payoff is why people were hoping for so long about Reize's return in part 2 because it was unfinished. This is why Fujimoto could get away with including like a single panel or like a single mention of her in part 2 and it could stir up the fanbase because they did expect more out of her and they didn't get it. Now let's talk about the Reize arc itself. People call it one of the best arcs in Chainsaw Man and I understand why. Reize is fascinating, the atmosphere is great, the ending is memorable, the idea of a child soldier trying to reach for love and freedom is just so powerful. I already made a full video on how I think Reize's character could have been explored more deeply. Instead, I want to focus on the fight. Because on paper, this should have been one of the most heartbreaking battles in the series, hell, in all of Shonen. You have two hybrids who clearly connect with each other, and yet they're forced into a conflict by cruel systems that couldn't give a damn about their well-being. This is such a strong setup. It should feel tragic, intimate, like two people who might have understood each other are being pulled apart by the lives they were trapped in. But what do we actually get? We get fan service, we get comedy, side characters fighting for screen time, Denji riding a shark while laughing through the city, Denji thirsting over Reize's legs, naked shots, panty shots. There's literally a point where Denji just fucks off mid-battle to fight a Sharknado monster while Reize waits in the background. Then when that's done, they just go right back to their fight like nothing happened. And I know people love that stuff because it's chaotic, it's ridiculous, and I get it, it's very Chainsaw Man. But at a certain point, I have to ask, what does any of this do for the tragedy? What does it do for Reize's character? What does it do for Denji's isolation? What does it do for the romance? At some point, you have to wonder whether the story is exploring these ideas or just interrupting them with spectacle. And this problem goes all the way back to the beginning. In the Bat Devil arc, Denji throws a car at the Bat Devil with a man still inside the car. That is attempted murder, and the story plays it as a joke. Now, if the point was clearly that Denji is so damaged and dehumanized that he doesn't value human life properly, that could be interesting. But then you have to actually explore that. You have to let it matter. You have to make Denji reflect and have meaningful confrontations. Instead, the scene is treated as a gag and we move on. And before someone says, well, Chainsaw Man is a dark comedy, yes, exactly, that's the point. It is dark comedy. So why do we pretend that every disturbing moment is also secretly profound character writing? Sometimes a shocking scene is just a shocking scene. Sometimes a gag is just a gag. Sometimes Fujimoto chooses impact over consistency, and that's fine. But we need to be honest about it. Because if Goku randomly slaughtered a Namekian village during the Frieza saga, and the story played it for laughs, people would not tolerate that, even as a joke. They would call it insane. And yes, Dragon Ball and Chainsaw Man are different series, but Dragon Ball was a gag manga originally, and kept those gags well into Z. Anyone remember Majin Buu? He was a whole gag villain and this was the final arc of the series. Toriyama loved absurdity, he loved jokes, he loved the ridiculous tonal shifts, just like Fujimoto. And even he understood that certain actions change how we see a character. You cannot have your protagonist nearly kill an innocent civilian as a joke, never return to it, and then act like his moral development is central to the story and it's masterfully executed, because it's not. I still love part 1 overall, I really do. I think, all of the aforementioned praise that I gave to it for its villain and its side cast, it all, it still sticks, it's still relevant. It has stronger emotional peaks, clearer stakes, but many of the problems that people now hate in part 2 were already there. Denji's development was always hit or miss. The sexual material was always mixed with its execution. Certain major characters, like Reize, were underexplored. Shock value often, not always, but often replaced follow-through. The story often gestured at deeper ideas without fully committing to them. Fujimoto did not magically become a worse writer between part 1 and part 2. Part 2 just made the flaws harder to ignore. So why did part 1 feel brilliant while part 2 felt disappointing? I think the answer is quite simple. The novelty wore off. Part 1 was fast, stylish, brutal, funny, and it was different from what people expected a battle shonen to be. It felt subversive. But once the shock wears off, once the formula becomes familiar, you start asking different questions. Like, wait, is Denji actually growing? Are these themes actually being explored or just implied? Does the story always have this many loose ends? And this is the uncomfortable part. Part 2 did not betray Part 1. Part 2 revealed what Part 1 had been getting away with. It's no longer why did Part 2 fall off? It's why did we convince ourselves that Part 1 was cleaner than it was? So I've already alluded to this, the fandom. And I want to be careful here because I hate when people do that thing where they go, this fandom is terrible, here's why they all suck. It's extremely hypocritical because we've all been that fan at one point. At least I have. I've been overly defensive of shows I loved in the past, especially My Hero Academia. It took me years to admit that show had real problems. Because when you're in the fan base, when you're immersed in the world and like the fantasy, it feels special. It feels like this amazing high, and when people criticize it, you hear someone trying to like take that high away from you. Like, why can't they just let me enjoy this? That was the thought running through my mind, even when criticism was completely valid. And while I was defending it, the years went by. We got new seasons, new arcs, new hype moments, and slowly My Hero lost its magic. This might seem like a bit of a tangent, but I promise you it connects. Ready? Okay. Why did All Might give Deku one for all? It seems obvious, right? All Might gave Deku the quirk because Deku has this pure instinctive sense of justice. In a world where heroes are optimizing for their brand, their reputation, their money, Deku is different. He's this quirkless, powerless, terrified kid, and he still runs in to save Bakugo. That's the premise at least. But then as the story goes on, we realize, wait a minute, most of Class 1A is about as selfless and heroic as Deku. Kirishima, Ochako, Ida, Suyu, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu. So suddenly, Deku's defining trait is no longer unique. And if Deku's not uniquely heroic, then why give one for all to him? Any of these naturally gifted, disciplined, selfless kids probably make better use of the strongest quirk in the world. And this is what long-running stories can do sometimes. Not because the author is incompetent or the fanbase is stupid, but because the story expands, the cast expands, and the audience gets attached, and suddenly the original premise gets diluted. At the start, Deku felt special because the world felt cynical. But if everyone around Deku is also brave, noble, self-sacrificing, and heroic, then what exactly made him the one? And once that problem exists, what do you even do? You can't just turn Class 1A like evil. These characters have fan bases. People love them. Horikoshi got enough harassment and death threats as it is. So the story keeps going. It keeps trying to give us the same hype moments, leveling up the powers, introducing new villains, tragic backstories. It keeps telling us that the premise still works, even though the foundation has been compromised. This is not his fault, this is just how series progress sometimes. Does that sound familiar? Because I think Chainsaw Man went down a very similar path. Part 1 got insane amounts of praise despite many of the flaws I talked about earlier. Then Part 2 repeated many of those same flaws. But for a while, people defended it. Then the quality dipped harder. Then the story got messier. Then the plot threads piled up. The character arcs stalled. And suddenly, those old flaws became impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Part 2 was never good. Suddenly, Fujimoto needs to pull off like the comeback of the century. Suddenly, every unresolved plot thread was like a big betrayal. But my question is, where was this energy before? People criticize Fujimoto for killing Nayuta, and I understand why. But Fujimoto has been praised for shock twists like this for years, even when those twists hurt the characters or the plot. Denji throws a civilian in a car at the Bat Devil. Reise disappears from the story without Denji ever reacting to her return. So how is Fujimoto supposed to know which shocks are brilliant and which ones are hollow if we clap every time? How is he supposed to know that readers want long-term character development when we spent years celebrating Denji emotionally resetting after every tragedy? Every tragedy, he goes back to being the same guy. How is he supposed to know that people are tired from the formula when for years the formula was the brand? It was the story. And yeah, he wrote it, I know. Obviously, I'm not saying the fandom held him at gunpoint and forced him to write that scene with Fumiko. But serialized manga is not just some guy writing things on a page. There's Fujimoto, there is editors, there's Jump's incentive structure, there are the sales numbers, there's the online hype, there are people screaming peak every week, there are people shutting down criticism because you just don't understand him. All of that matters, especially when Fujimoto has a history of being active online and interacting with the fans. I'm not saying he was writing based on Twitter polls, but pretending authors are completely sealed off from the audience reaction is ridiculous. And when every strange choice gets defended as genius or gets hated on without adequate reason, the author is basically driving through fog while people in the back seat yell speed up, and then the car crashes and then everyone acts shocked. And that's why I feel bad for Fujimoto, not because he didn't do anything wrong. He made mistakes, a lot of them. But because he created a monster he may not have fully understood, this monster which brought him fame, money, praise, opportunities, and a massive audience. And then when that monster finally turned ugly, the same culture that fed it threw every mistake back in his face. Maybe the real tragedy is not that Fujimoto betrayed us, maybe it's that we rewarded the wrong things, and in doing so, we betrayed him. So what now? Chainsaw Man is over. No amount of discussion, regret, or here's how I would have fixed it will change the ending we got. This is the series we're left with, but hopefully there's a lesson there. I used to be in the let people enjoy things crowd, back when I was deep in the My Hero Academia fanbase. I thought criticism was just negativity. If you don't like it, don't watch it. If you complain, you're just ruining the fun. But I was wrong, because sometimes refusing to criticize a story does not protect it. Sometimes it lets the story rot. And I think that happened with Chainsaw Man. Somewhere along the way, we blurred the line between criticism and hatred. Honest feedback became hating. But criticism is not the enemy of art. Bad faith harassment is the enemy. That should not be tolerated. But sincere criticism, like being respectful, criticism that says, I care about this and that's why I'm worried, that might be one of the most loving things a fan can offer. Maybe the lesson of Chainsaw Man is not that Fujimoto made mistakes. Maybe the lesson is that we, as fans, needed to be honest sooner. Because if we reward the wrong things for years, we can't act shocked when the story gives us exactly what we asked for. That's all for now. Let me know what you thought of the ending, where you think I'm wrong. I always welcome discussion. I only ask that you be nice. Thank you for watching and have a blessed day.